friends, welcome back to another episode of GM Philosophy in the Morning. I'm the GM Philosopher. So yesterday I published a story about my first epic level campaign, the first campaign of my first epic level campaign, the Mazaak Campaign. This was part one. Players reached epic levels. It was amazing. I'll put a card up here. And you can go watch that video if you want. This is going to be part two. Now, after campaign number one was finished, a couple years went by and some things happened. I had some changes go on in my life. We ran a few shorter term campaigns, but nothing that really stuck. My life was reaching sort of a strange turning point. Over those next couple of years, some personal things happened. I ended up going through a divorce. I ended up moving. Like, a lot changed, okay? My friend groups also changed. Some of the people I had been gaming with, I wasn't gaming with anymore, but some of my friends held fast. And some of the people who were in that game in the first campaign were present for the second one. But eventually, a couple years later, circumstances led to me launching what became the second long-term most successful campaign I had ever run. And this was part two in what would become the Mazaak Trilogy. And this campaign was called the White Dragon Campaign. Now, there were some interesting fun developments. This was the very first game where one of my kids played with me. My son was actually old enough at this point to play D&D with me, so he joined us in this campaign. It was super fun. Some dear friends who had played in the previous campaigns joined us, and we also had a few new faces in the campaign that had not played with us before. And so this campaign started out being kind of a wild campaign, but it ended up being extremely epic, and I'm here to tell you the story of this. So this campaign took place in the world of Greyhawk, okay? So the world of Greyhawk, if I'm remembering correctly, and keep in mind, I'm 38 years old. I'm not getting any younger. I plan to live to be 200, but still, my mind gets a little fuzzy sometimes about the details. If you're a player who played in that game and you're watching back on this, please forgive me if I get a few details wrong. It's certainly not on purpose. I try to remember as best I can, but there are times when my memory just fails me a little bit. So with that being said, I'm going to try my best to retell this as best I can. This campaign took place thousands of years after the events of the first campaign. The characters from that first campaign were basically long ago legends to the characters in this campaign. The events of this campaign, the White Dragon campaign, basically started like this. It started with kind of a backstory, like a cutscene, which basically led to the creation of the villain. So here's what it was. Hey, real quick, do your players ever do unexpected things? Do you ever find yourself thinking, what the heck, all my plans have gone to ruin? These players, as creative as they are, have just gone off on a tangent, and now I don't know what the heck is going on. If you ever feel this way, then I have the perfect tool for you. It's called the Ultimate Plot Randomizer. Ignite your campaign with endless adventure. This ebook contains 4 D100 tables, lets you random roll plot arcs on the fly. Roll on the hook table, the complication table, the climax table, and even on the wild and wacky table to add plot elements that your characters would never see coming. I give this ebook away for free to everyone who joins my email list. It's just my way of giving back and saying thanks to you and giving away a resource that, to be quite honest, I use nearly every single time I play and every time I session prep. If you want to get this ebook, all you have to do is join my email list. Link is in the description. If you sign up, you'll get an email autoresponder sent to you between a few seconds to 15 minutes after you sign up. The time tends to vary, so be a little tiny bit patient. It might take it like 15-20 minutes to show up in your inbox. And make sure to check your spam folder. But in that first email, the download link will be available. Click on it, download, print, boom, put with your stuff. Never get caught without amazing plot arcs ever again. Roll random plot arcs for days and days and days. Your player characters will literally not be able to keep up with how many amazing plot arcs you're able to create, and thus you will never have an adventure go off the rails again. I'm kidding. They'll probably still go off the rails. You'll just be way more prepared. Like I said, link is in the description. Grab that. Don't miss it. All right, let's get back to the video. In the material world, in this world state that I created, basically which was a homebrewed version of Greyhawk, there were many gates, okay? There were gates that basically served as transportation mechanisms between important worlds. And this specific story takes place at a gate that was called Gate 13, which was a gateway between the material world and the nine hells. Now, these gates existed in sort of like in between pocket worlds. So you had the material world, and you'd go through a gate to the in between world, the gate world, and then there was this huge gateway to the hells. In theory, sometimes treaties could be negotiated to let things come in and out of these gates, but for the most part there was a special order of like sort of like monk warrior spellcasters who were assigned to each gate. It was almost like a religious order. They were performing the duty of guarding the gates, and it was their whole purpose. And at gate 13, the commanding officer was this basically a sorcerer, samurai martial artist named Kenji Kazuko. He was an elite fighter. I mean, a deadly force of nature, both with a katana and with spell casting. Was absolutely just, had fought in countless battles, had fought devils, had fought basically like all kinds of monsters, was just a absolute unit. Kenji Kazuko was the leader of the guard for Gate 13, but an incident happened that sparked the entire, basically, story for the White Dragon campaign. Kenji Kazuko one night was in his home, and he had a family. He had a wife and a child. He had a little daughter. One night, devils, like covert ops devils, managed to sneak into the gate past the guards, and they came to Kenji Kazuko's home, and they took his daughter back through the gate and into the nine hells. Now, this violated about 1,000 different interdimensional treaties, which would have taken maybe hundreds of years to figure out through the bureaucracy of the gods and the hells and the material world, but Kenji Kazuko did not have that time. His daughter had been taken, and when faced with the choice of either remaining stoic, letting his daughter go and doing his duty at the gate, or deciding to go the way of the father and pursue his daughter, he made his choice. He donned his armor, he took up his weapons, and he went on a solo invasion of the nine hells. He entered the nine hells and cut, slashed, and destroyed his way through anything in his path. And he eventually arrived to the place. He tracked the people who had taken his daughter, the devils, and he tracked them to the gates of Tiamat's fortress. Yes, Tiamat had arranged and spearheaded the kidnapping of Kenji Kazuko's daughter. Why? Well, this was a great mystery, which would not come out until the very end of the campaign, and the players would learn secrets of this along the way. But what actually ended up happening, what actually ended up becoming like the story was this. If you remember from part one of the story, Mazaak was locked in the bottom of the nine hells, but he had been in contact with Tiamat. Now, there's a lot to this story, and I'm going to really try not to forget anything. I'm going to try to only hit the major points without like talking for hours and hours and hours about this, but here is what happened. Mazaak said to Tiamat, listen, this is what I've done. This is what I could do, but I can't escape. If you will help me escape, we could do it together. I'll include you in the plan. Tiamat was vengeful, angry. She had been imprisoned in Avernus. She was the watchdog of Avernus under Asmodeus's thumb. She hated him. She wanted to see the hells burn, and then she wanted to come out, and in her rage, she wanted to see the world burn. Mazaak was speaking her language. Mazaak was speaking to her in a language that she understood, a language of rage, of passion, of violence. Hey, hold on real quick. I have two questions for you. Do you love adventure? Do you love random roll tables? If so, then I have the perfect ebook for you. May I present the GM Philosopher's Ultimate Adventure Generator, 163 random roll tables on 310 printable pages governing nearly every aspect of adventure creation. If you love creating adventures and rolling on plat arcs to keep it fresh and new, then this is the ebook for you. Created in ultimate GM Philosopher fashion with random roll tables literally for days and days and days. You will be able to use this ebook to inject freshness into nearly every aspect of your adventure creation. Look at these chapters: selecting the adventure theme, defining the main quest, choosing the setting or location, identifying the main antagonist, determining key NPCs, generating obstacles and challenges, adding complications or plot twists, and more. And in every single chapter, there are all kinds of random tables. Let's take a look at chapter 1 just by itself. Selecting the adventure theme, we have an adventure genre table, we have a primary theme table, setting, environment, tone and mood, secondary theme, cultural inspiration, magic level, tech level, significant supernatural elements, what? Conflict scale, moral alignment, temporal setting, unique adventure hooks, and guess what? If we scroll all the way to the bottom of this chapter, a D20 table of plug and play adventure theme ideas, literally adventure themes you can just plug and play with. And that's only in chapter 1. There are 16 chapters in this book, and many of those chapters have D100 tables. There are over 20 D100 tables in this book. Being one of the newest GM Philosophy products, this ebook, The Ultimate Adventure Generator, is available right now for just $5.99. For just $5.99, you can get 163 random roll tables on 310 print-friendly pages, and guess what? It's available right now on my personal bookstore. Link is in the description, and if you purchase this, not only will you be getting literally random tables for days, but you'll be supporting an amazing channel run by small creators who are trying to make a huge difference in the TTRPG space and really bring a fresh element to it and make the game better for game masters everywhere. So don't delay, grab that in the description. You're not going to want to miss it. I'll see you on the other side, and make sure to roll a few D100s for me while you're at it. But here's the thing. Both Tiamat and Mazaak suffered from the same problem. They were both prisoners of Asmodeus. Tiamat could not escape from her fortress in Avernus. Asmodeus had tight control over her and had for millennia. Mazaak could not escape his cell, literally existing as a skeleton in a stream of magical lava that prevented him from even beginning the process of regeneration. If they could just stop the lava, they could regenerate. But alas, as it was, Tiamat and Mazaak were powerless to really do anything. With an exception, Tiamat did have some allies. She had some trusted compatriots who, though they were amongst the ranks assigned to guard her and keep her captive in the fortress that Asmodeus had built to contain her, there were also those who were loyal to her. And so she used some of these loyalties to kidnap Kenji Kazuko's daughter. And here's why. Of all of the generals of the gates that existed between the Nine Hells and the material world, Gate 13 was by far the most successful, and Kenji Kazuko was well known as being the most formidable general and warrior of all of the warriors in all of the gates. He was the prime example of a brilliant strategist, possibly on par with Mazaak himself, and his combat prowess, even Tiamat had to admit, was impressive, and even she would take pause to just blindly enter combat with him. And so they also chose him because he could possibly be manipulated. He had this daughter, and Tiamat made a gamble. She believed that he would choose his daughter over his duty, and she was correct. The human part of him, because he was a human actually, before he became General of Gate 13, brilliant strategist, martial supremacist samurai, and master level sorcerer, he was a human at heart and in mind. And so Tiamat exploited this, kidnapped his daughter, and manipulated him, bringing him to the gates, bringing him to her. And it was here that Tiamat met him face to face and made a bargain with him. See, Tiamat and Mazaak needed an ally on the outside. They needed an outside power to help them. They needed someone on the outside to be an agent, to just do a few things that would allow them to escape. And the white dragon, Kenji Kazuko, was this person. Kenji Kazuko made a deal with Tiamat. He made a deal that he would launch a war in the material world so dangerous and so profound that it would draw attention away from both Tiamat and Mazaak. He also made a deal with her that he would amass the power necessary to enact their escapes from the nine hells, allowing them to enter the material world. But there were a couple stipulations. Number one, they would need to give his daughter back safely. And number two, they would need to include him in their plans, because at this point, he knew that he had violated so many treaties, so many regulations. He had become such an enemy of the entire material plane, the realm of gods, and the nine hells, that he had no allies left. He was a dead man, to be honest, at this point, without Tiamat and Mazaak. So he was throwing his lot in with them. It was the only way to save his daughter, and it was a choice he had to make, to go from good guard captain to evil master strategist who is going to basically help to strategize the greatest jailbreak and world domination exercise that my world state had ever seen. In return, Tiamat gave him a lot of stuff she had stowed away, magic items, powers, blessings, and the promise that he would get his daughter back and that he would become part of the new world order that was to come, led by Mazaak and Tiamat. He would become their lieutenant and be their right hand in it. And in the war to come, he would lead the armies. So he left the nine hells, came to the material world, and all hell broke loose. He started a cult to follow Tiamat. He began a campaign of global world domination. Very quickly, he amassed followings of people. He started getting alliances. He started turning people to his side. And it was partly through his ability to manipulate through diplomacy and strategy. He got many entire kingdoms to join his cause without even having them really understand what they were joining up for. He was such a skilled diplomat and such a powerful general that a lot of the kingdoms joined either out of fear or just out of the promise that, listen, you're going to become part of what will come next. And they felt like they were facing destruction at the hand of Kenji Kazuko, Master General of Gate 13, literally a gate guarding the nine hells and the material world from invasions from each other. Or they could join because they were pretty sure that he was going to win, because everything Kenji Kazuko ever put his mind to was basically a wild success. And so Kenji Kazuko became the White Dragon. And the reason he was called the White Dragon was because he was seen as a pure-hearted individual with a singular focus. He also wore white robes and white armor and fought with a frost white katana. And so he had a visage to go along with it. So he became the White Dragon and had very quickly, by the time the campaign was up and running, he had an army that numbered in the tens of thousands, and it was growing by the day, and it was sweeping across the world, and Greyhawk was in serious danger. Now, I will be honest, I don't specifically exactly remember how we started that campaign. It's a little bit fuzzy to me, but very quickly, all of the player characters became aware of, whoa, dude, there's this White Dragon person. They're trying to take over the world. We're going to help stop him. And that was basically the theme of it. But there were so many things that went on. There's so many things. The gods, once again, were directly involved. And the gods chose the player characters as champions. Once again, they're like, it has been thousands of years since the world's been threatened like this. We need you to stop the White Dragon. We need you to stop him. And we need you to basically, get him to stop. We need him destroyed, etc. Okay, so here is how this basically went down. So once again, this was an epic level campaign. Now, the player characters did a lot of roundabout things. This campaign was less about just building an army and facing the White Dragon. The player characters did a lot of different things to try to gain power in unique places. And if I'm not mistaken, their theory was that, okay, what we need to do is take out the White Dragon. If we try to face him on the battlefield, even with massive armies at our disposal, there's a good chance we're going to lose, because he's actually a brilliant military strategist and he's put this whole thing together. Our best bet is to kind of work covertly to gather as much power as we can and then to fight him and take him out. That was kind of their plan. And that was actually, it turned out to be a very good plan. And it turned out to get really wild. But this campaign had some really memorable characters in it. There was a lawful good paladin who specialized in mounted lance warfare, ended up having a legendary celestial rhino as a mount that was so big. The rhino was actually, it ended up being it actually ended up being gargantuan in size. It was so big that the way they charged was the paladin, who was a human, built like a platform that they would put on the rhino's nose, sort of like a deck with railings, almost like a ship's deck. And then he would hold his lance out the front, so he would hit with his lance, and then the rhino would hit with the horn, and they would be just crazy amounts of damage. There was a wizard who was actually like a fireball dispenser on massive steroids. His name was Wendell the Mad. He was basically an old, kind of insane, very powerful wizard who loved fire spells. There was this there was a character who, okay, this is kind of hard to explain, but this was just a fun thing that happened during the campaign. There was a sort of like an unarmed fighter monk, like a catfolk, like a Khajiit type character, who was basically like a monk but fought with claws, who ended up amassing like this army of orphans. They started collecting orphans, and these orphans became sort of like an assassin group of like child assassins. And then this cat-like character ended up getting recruited by Hextor and became like this really high-level Hextorian like priest, basically evil god, Hextor. But then this character, whose name was Cade, ended up actually dying for a while. And then another character came into the picture, run by that same player. His name was Matthew, who was if I'm not mistaken, was a wizard who specialized in like temporal type stuff and was very interested in time travel and stuff. And then there was a lot of wild things that happened. But this character, whose name is Matthew, he actually ended up being quite short-lived, because there was one point where the party got into big trouble and they were like trying to get out of it. And Matthew, the way he helped get out of it was he actually created, through a bunch of he made a homebrewed spell and all these things, and actually created a time paradox where he met himself in two different timelines. Mistral, who in my setting was the goddess of time and the weave, she was very powerful. She was above the other gods, but she was more like a force of nature than an actual god who took part in politics. She was like beyond politics and being more just like a primordial force of nature. But she came down and was like, no, mortal, you cannot do this. You are banned from existence. And so she took him back to the weave and basically made him a time lord, which was kind of fun. There was also a brief period of time where Cade and Matthew were stuck in the same body, both consciousnesses in the same body for a while. And so that was a little confusing. It's just a really fun thing. But Matthew ended up opening up and discovering time travel for the players, and they ended up discovering what was called the time stream, which would end up becoming a very important fixture in my games. It turns out that mortals actually could, in theory, reference or gain entrance to the time stream. Now, I've created a video about the time stream. You can find a link up here, card. The time stream concept became a really prevalent part of my story. But basically, Matthew was the one who pioneered that, being interested in temporal time. His research into opening the time stream got him banned from all existence, but he did end up returning later periodically as a sort of Time Lord character who would interfere in timey-wimey nonsense. Basically, anytime any of the players started messing with time, Matthew would show up and be like, oh, hey guys, you can't do that. I can't let you do that, guys. You got to stop. Abandon the mission. Basically would come in as an agent of Mistral and do these things. So he became like a servant of Mistral. And he would go on to actually do other things too. Being banished and serving Mistral turned out to be sort of a temporary thing. He only did that for like a few thousand years. But anyway, I digress. The players ended up amassing, there was also this druid who built this whole druid grove, and they all became epic level, okay? And what it really came down to was this. The White Dragon was trying to take over the world. These players were doing all these things, basically trying to make themselves so formidable that they could face him in one-on-one combat. Halfway through the campaign, they actually did face him in one-on-one combat. They thought to themselves, we might be able to take him. They ended up going to this dinner, which was a trap, and the White Dragon attacked them because he realized they, of all the mortals in the world, they posed the greatest threat. So he tried to take them out, and they fought. It was all of them versus him, and all of the player characters, this was around the time they were level like 10 or 11, they barely escaped with their lives. Like, they barely escaped, and they realized, okay, this guy is really formidable. So that kind of gave like just a taste of kind of how powerful he was. With that being said, that situation developed, and here's the way it ended, and this is actually it's actually pretty wild. Here's how they ended up stopping the White Dragon. They ended up planning this huge, very elaborate attack. They had a whole bunch of NPCs doing things. I mean, they called in favors from everywhere. And here's what happened. They ended up basically putting together this situation where they also learned they learned about outer space too in this campaign. They partly through back engineering crashed UFO technology that they found, and through some other things, they realized that there was an outer space and an atmosphere. See, they were doing everything they could to not face Mazaak's army, or not Mazaak, to not face the White Dragon's army directly. What they were actually trying to do, like really, 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 really trying to do, was they were trying to sort of like find a way to just take him out. So they ended up doing this thing. So they were able to find his location. He was an expert at masking his location, but they found a way to basically isolate his position. Then they had a bunch of whales who volunteered through the druid's help. The whales got transported up to space, and then they got turned into iron whales. So they were big and they were iron. And then spellcasters up in space created these portals, okay? And basically, the whales would go through the portals right above and come out right above where the White Dragon was. And they would use the velocity of the planet's gravity to accelerate, sort of like a re-entry rocket or like an asteroid, accelerate to crazy speeds. They had enough spells put on them to protect them through re-entry, and they would hit and detonate within seconds, in theory faster than the White Dragon would be able to react. And with as much destructive power, we actually did the math. One of my players got out a whole whiteboard and demonstrated the calculations, like the algebraic calculations about like how many megatons, like how many nuclear bombs worth of destructive power would be generated by these whales. And they were like 6 whales. They were gonna like go ding 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 ding, like they were gonna hit them and just vaporize it. So what ended up happening was they were actually successful. They also had a bunch of like NPCs and player characters working full time to shield the White Dragon from learning this plan. So it was like a top secret plan, and they had to be incredibly careful. They found this one NPC who's actually a 9-tailed magical fox who specialized especially in scrying and counter scrying. And so they got her to, for example, help shield the project from the White Dragon. So she was constantly in this like scry battle with the White Dragon, constantly trying to keep him confused and keep him from seeing things. Because that's another one of his big upsides, was he was very good at like watching his enemies. So they were able to actually cover up this operation successfully. Their checks made it, everything. And it took, a long time. It probably took the last 3 levels of the campaign, probably a dozen sessions, just to get to the point where they were ready to launch this. Like, this plan was in development for so long, and they built it up, and then they launched the attack. And as it turned out, the White Dragon didn't see it coming. They ended up hitting his like headquarters at the whales. It ended up completely destroying his headquarters and vaporizing it, and he perished. They actually killed him in the attack. When they killed him, it triggered this event where they had to, like, this monster appeared. It turned out he was summoning like a secret weapon monster to help him in his final battle. He was going to use it as a weapon. Turned out it contained the soul of his stolen daughter, and that was like part of the deal. That was part of how she was going to come back to the material world. Then he was going to like transfer it to a body, but is this huge creature. I mean, just this, to call it, gargantuan would just not do it justice. It was so massive. The problem was it was premature because it wasn't fully developed yet. It was still like being created, if that makes sense. So they actually summoned it and it was only at like half power. So it kind of had a breath weapon, but it wasn't as good as it could have been. So it was actually kind of like a Godzilla, but it was slow and cumbersome and lumbering. And basically they spent a few turns just giving it everything they had. And it was mostly HP and not a ton of attack damage, partly because they had launched such a surprise attack and caught the white dragon off guard. And it was a huge battle. They had to fight this creature that popped up after their nuclear explosion, basically, and they were able to defeat it, and they were able to extract the soul from it. And they actually, what they did, if I'm remembering correctly, was the white dragon actually died and was going to go to the nine hells, I believe, if I remember correctly, and they actually allowed him and his daughter to be reunited. And so there was sort of a moment where he turned back to good in like a force ghost kind of thing and was like, thank you, I realized that what I was doing was monstrous. You stopped it as you should have. He was like a super honorable villain. He was like a lawful evil who had been lawful good, but he was just like a super straightforward, like lawful person. So there was an amount of respect he had to them legitimately for being able to defeat him. And he also kind of told them, he was like, I had thought of every single possibility. Meeting you in combat, there was no way you could have won. And you did the only thing that I didn't actually think about was you managed to find a way to create enough destructive power to take me out without even engaging in combat. And he was like, that was my weakness. I was thinking about the combat and you were thinking ahead of that. And so that was like that kind of was how it ended up wrapping up. And so the White Dragon campaign came to a close. There were so many, again, wild things that happened in this campaign, but it was an epic level campaign. Players did so many crazy, wild things. I can't even begin to, you know how it is in a long campaign. You can't even begin to tell the whole story of it. But basically that was campaign number 2 of this 3 campaign arc, the Mazaak Trilogy. First was the Mazaak campaign, and this was, as I call it, the White Dragon campaign. Now, there was a little bit of mystery toward the end of this. The White Dragon went back to the Nine Hells, but then quickly vanished, slipping through Asmodeus's grasp. And it turned out that he had a plan for this. He had a backup plan for what would happen if he were taken out in his attempts to take over the world. And unfortunately for the world, his plan B only set into motion events that were going to come to pass in campaign number 3, which would go on to be the final chapter of the Mazaak saga, the final fight where the fate of the world hangs in the balance, the toughest battle the world had ever faced in my world state, and what would come to be known as the Hero Campaign. And so I will tell that story tomorrow. Thank you so much for joining me for another episode of GM Philosophy in the Morning. I hope you enjoy these stories. I don't do a lot of these, but I decided to go ahead and do these 3 days just to do something different and to tell you something different and to create something a little different. So boom, there you go. Enjoy, and I will see you tomorrow morning with the story of campaign number 3, the Hero Campaign, and the final chapter in the Mazaak Trilogy.